We're on a 2-week road trip through Southern Ireland. Part 1 has covered our trip from Dublin to Killarney. It's our second full day in Killarney, and today we're driving the Ring of Kerry. We're driving the ring counterclockwise, and we get an early start to beat the traffic. Our first quick stop is on the spit of land called Ross Behy. We were soon on our way to our first stone structure, Cathergall Stone Fort. These circular structures of dry stacked stone are common on the western side of Ireland. Though commonly referred to as forts, their actual purpose is not fully understood. On our way back to the car was a rancher who touted to the tourists by soliciting a donation to hold one of his lambs. Nearby was Bailey Carberry Castle. It's been closed to the public for a number of years, but it still made an interesting stop. At the northwestern end of the Iberic Peninsula is Valentia Island, about halfway along our drive of the Ring of Kerry. There are only a couple of small villages on the island, but it's known for its wonderful views, including those of the Skellig Islands. Braving the cold wind, we drove up the Geocon Mountain and Fogger Cliffs, taking in the panoramic view of the countryside. Back on the mainland, we take a quick stop at Skellig's Chocolate Factory to warm up with a hot chocolate and some fresh cookies, before making our way up the southern coast. The Derrynane House was the home to the O'Connor family. Daniel O'Connor was a famous member of Parliament and a civil rights activist. He was nicknamed the Liberator for his great contributions to justice and social change. Thank you. Staig Fort is one of the largest stone forts in Ireland. It would have been the home to the chieftain's family. The inside would have been filled with houses and outbuildings for his family, guards, and servants. This is Ladies' View with a panorama of Upper Lake where we were yesterday. Across the way was another one of the many castle ruins, along with a red deer, the only deer native to Ireland. Back in Killarney, we visited one of the many pubs and finished off our day with a rich bowl of Guinness stew. This morning we returned to Muckross Traditional Farms. The farm is set up as a representation of an Irish village dating back to the 1930s. We start off in the small farmhouse.
Now we're going back in time to the 1930s and early 40s here. We have no electricity or running water. Now that would be a bed for the children. It's called the settle bed, 2 facing 2. The roof, it's the straw of the bog. It's the cleaning of the bog before we cut the top.
Is that what you're burning?
Absolutely, yeah. And we bake the white traditional soda right here, in this oven here, over the fire. I'll be baking later on. And if you want a little taste of bread and butter, that's there. The butter they make in the large farm, that's perfect.
Outside the small farmhouse is a labourer's cottage, along with some pigs and geese.
You see, this is the medium-sized farm. 40 acres. You see, more land meant more wealth. So I brought a bedroom for the children, a bed for the boys and a bed for the girls. A Singer sewing machine.
Oh, wow.
And a radio. They had no running water, no electricity.
And it's your husband who does the fiddle?
And this was a rambling house. Yeah, we all do it. And do you know what a rambling house is?
No, I don't.
The neighbours would gather around once a week in the winter, not as often in the summer, and there'd be a bit of storytelling, music, and a sing-song and a dance.
Well, how did the radio work then?
Battery operated. You'll see the battery.
You have a crank to charge it, or is it just you buy the battery?
You have to take it to the store to get it charged.
The medium-sized farm had cows, and I was able to try my hand at milking one.
So he's not just pulling on it, he's actually
Squeezing down. Yeah, I thought I was doing that, but I was getting a very small stream.
But like, can you know, what? I'd like to know. Yeah.
The large farm had stables, along with harvesting machines, carriages, and additional servants' quarters. There were a lot more rooms in the house, including a nicely furnished dining room. The village also included a carpenter's workshop, a saddler, blacksmith, and a 2-room schoolhouse, with each teacher teaching up to 5 grades at the same time. After leaving the Killarney area, we head toward the little town of Dingle, but on our way we take a quick stop at Inch Beach. I was surprised there were no restrictions. Drive wherever you want and bring your dog. I was expecting the landscape to be drier out here on the Dingle Peninsula, but especially in the valleys, you can tell why Ireland is called the Emerald Isle. Dingle is a bustling little town, just brimming with restaurants and pubs. Things were even more hectic while we were there, since they were hosting a triathlon. There was plenty of town to wander through, but a lot of the restaurants were booked. We ended up having a nice meal at John Benny's pub, before finishing our day out with a drink and some music. We're spending the morning taking Sleehead Drive along the tip of the Dingle Peninsula. There's a lot of stacked stone structures along the way, and we stop at one of the beehive hut communities. We were surprised that a lot of these structures are on private land, and the landowner charges admission for you to see them. Each one of these circular huts housed one family, and were built entirely by just stacking stones. We generally found the ride more interesting and picturesque than the more popular Ring of Kerry. A lot of the stone walls in the fields aren't for separating pastures. They're just a way to stack up the stones so they can clear the land. Our tour guide at Ross Castle told us that one of the main reasons there were so many old buildings that are in ruins is that England enacted a roof tax, saying that any building that had a roof had to pay taxes to England. So the buildings that weren't used, or if the owner couldn't pay the tax, had their roofs removed, exposing the structure to the elements. These ruins here are an old monastery, probably founded around the 6th century. This is the Gallerus Oratory, and it's a Christian church that was built around 700 BC. And like most of the other structures here, totally built of dry-fit stones, so well crafted it's still watertight. Nearby is Kamal Kadar. This church dates back to the mid-12th century. In front of the church is an Ogham stone, and it's 900 years older than the church itself. It's an old-standing Irish tradition for 2 people to touch their fingers through the hole and swear before their ancestors on a promise. This promise, no matter what it was now binding until death. We're back in Dingle for lunch, and it was recommended to us to try the fish box. They opened their doors in 2018, and they only serve fish freshly caught from their own boat. Well, after a delicious lunch, we're off to Tralee. There really wasn't much to do in town, but we had this wonderful view of the church from our hotel room. The next morning we were on our way to the city of Limerick, and a visit to King John's Castle. Our self-guided tour starts off with a walk through a museum, showing off a lot of its violent history. We soon enter out onto the Bailey, or the main courtyard. Along the walls were wooden structures that would have been used by craftsmen and merchants. In the castle, each room was set up to display a different occupation, and there was an actor on a video screen describing what life was like for them. Nearby was St. Mary's Cathedral. Running short on time, we passed on the €5 entrance fee and just took a quick peek inside. From Limerick, we drove out to the Ciffs of Moher, forgetting that our tour tomorrow included a visit.
We'll see the other side of that on the boat tomorrow.
With our room awaiting us, we finally arrive in Galway about 5:30, just enough time to settle in and find some dinner. We take the 10-minute walk from our B&B over to the Latin Quarter, passing over the Salmon Ware Bridge. We ended up at the Pie Maker, where we split a slow-braised beef and stout pie. Today we're on an all-day tour, which includes a boat ride for a visit to the Aran Islands. We'll be taking the ferry for the 30-minute trip to Inisheer Island, the smallest but most populated of the 3 Aran Islands. Once on the island, we took a horse and buggy tour. Our driver's name was Arnis, and his horse was Sandy. So, you don't get freezing weather here, do you?
No, you don't get any snow. About half an inch of snow in Ireland, sure, Ireland gets to a standstill.
Arnis explained that the land was originally all stone. The stone was broken up and stacked, making the stone walls. Then sand and seaweed were brought up from the beach. As they were layered, they eventually decayed into usable soil. But boy, look at them all. Just to get a little bit of pasture land, huh? Is it mainly for sheep?
But when I was growing up, there was a lot of sheep on the island, but it's mainly beef now.
The walls are built specifically with gaps in them, so the winds don't blow them down. On the east side of the island is the Plassey shipwreck. In 1960, it was blown ashore in a storm. Among its cargo was whiskey and toilets. Arnis told us the supplies were put to good use, and there were a lot of bathroom updates. The next leg of our tour takes us back onto the water for a view of the Ciffs of Moher from below. Back on land, we're driven up to the top of the cliffs where we were yesterday. On our way back to Galway, we passed by the Burns, exposed limestone, scraped clean by glaciers. Not everything that looks good necessarily is. Tonight we're at All Pucan, and we're splitting an order of tiger prawns, mussels, and penne pasta. Looks pretty good, but it was bland and flavorless, along with not finding much in the way of mussels among the shells. That, along with the questionable music, left us wanting for more. Today we're heading straight back to the Dublin airport to turn in the car. We will then be taking a bus into downtown Dublin for our 2-night stay. We arrived just in time for lunch. Wanting a break from Irish food, we found Lee's Charming Noodles, and we each had a giant bowl of their noodles with spicy beef, along with some ginger tea. With bellies full, we head on over to the Dublin Castle. The castle was erected in the 13th century, on the site of a Viking settlement. At the start of our tour, our guide explained how Dublin got its name.
So the Vikings started to arrive here in Ireland in 791. But what they did for the next 50 or so years is they pillaged the country. Here we have what they call the Black Pool. The Vikings called it the Black Pool. And that was very dark and deep in colour and nature. There was vegetation and rock at the bottom that gave that black look. The Vikings, when they arrived here, they married the local people and they learned the language. So when you translate that word Black Pool to Irish, it becomes Dublin, and when you anglicise that, it becomes Dublin. So we have the Vikings to thank for the name of our city.
Our tour of the castle continues to Chapel Royal. No longer an ordained church, it's still used for concerts and other events. When Ireland became a free state, they wanted to use the Gaelic harp as their national symbol. But Guinness was already using it, so they just mirrored the image. The tour continues through the state apartments. This is the official drawing room, used to receive foreign dignitaries. The throne here was originally built for King George IV in 1821. This is the portrait gallery, also used as the state dining room. Near our hotel is the spire. It stands 198 feet tall, and it was finished in 2003, making it a landmark you can see throughout the city. Our next stop on our walk through downtown is the Cathedral of the Holy Trinity, also known as Christ Church Cathedral. It's located in the former heart of medieval Dublin, and the original structure dates back to about 1030. The crypt had some interesting items. The most unusual is a mummified cat and rat that were found in one of the organ pipes when it was being renovated in 1860. For dinner we ended up at the Celt pub. Marianne had some sweet potato fries and we shared some fish and chips. The next morning we passed up on the expensive breakfast at the hotel and headed around the corner to Anne's Bakery for a pick-what-you-want Irish breakfast. Even though it was tempting, we passed on the delicious treats. This morning we're heading down to Trinity College, just to take a look around. Well, this looks familiar. It's the sculpture Sphere Within a Sphere that we saw at the Vatican. Apparently there are a number of different versions around the world. This cast iron bridge is officially called the Liffey Bridge, but is more commonly called the Halfpenny Bridge, since in 1816 it cost a halfpenny to cross. Well, we're now in the Temple Bar District, and it's time for some refreshments.
Look for the spark that lights the night through a teardrop in my eyes. Right on, see you. I can never go with you no matter how I wanted to.
After a couple of hours, and more than a couple of drinks, we were off to St. Patrick's Cathedral. As we were walking through the area known as the Liberties, we came across John's Lane Church. The outside was gorgeous, so we thought it was worth a peek inside. And we were right. While we were in the area, we stopped by Jameson's Distillery. We didn't have reservations for a tour, so we just took a quick peek inside. We were told a number of times that adding a few drops of water to your whiskey will enhance the flavor, and we saw a pipette at the tasting bar just for that purpose. With pubs and churches everywhere, it was just natural to find a church that had been turned into a pub. Well, that ends our last day in Dublin, as well as our 2-week driving tour through Southern Ireland.